Hi stamping friends, Melissa Kerman here with Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. Today I have a simple project for you made with the Snowfront stamp set. In this video you'll learn a simple trick for creating two different cards with the same exact cardstock and layering with one simple change. So this was one of my 3 club and free card kit projects for November-December 2019. And I showed people how to make the focal piece in 2 different ways, so they had some choice about how to make their card. Now to start with, off camera, I have die cut one of my stitched rectangle dies for my focal piece. Now I'm going to start by showing you the simpler of the 2 card layouts. And I've got my blueberry bushel ink there. I've inked it up and stamped it off once on my scratch paper. And I'm going to stamp that mountain. And then I'm going to go back in and ink it up again, and I'm going to stamp off twice, and then do my second mountain. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my third and my fourth inking to create even more of a scene with mountains in the background. Each time I stamp it, the ink gets a little bit lighter, which makes those mountains look more in the background, and of course the darker mountains in the foreground. Now this blueberry bushel ink is very dark, and sometimes when I stamped it and I used second inking it was really too dark, and I think that was a function of how juicy the ink pad was. So you may want to test out your stamping of the mountain on your scratch paper, and you may want to start with third inking for that first mountain and then do third, fourth, fifth, and sixth instead. Just so that your mountains don't overshadow the tree. So now I'm stamping the tree in early espresso ink, and I've stamped it in such a way that the branches sort of straddle that one darkest mountain on the left. And now I'm coming in with my real red ink and stamping a little cardinal on the branch of the tree. Now I found when I stamped these birds that I had to stamp them a little bit lower than I actually anticipated in order to actually have them touch the branch and make it look like the bird had landed and wasn't coming in for a landing. So that might be something you'd like to play around with ahead of time on your scratch paper to make sure that you get the bird where you want it. Now you may be happy with having the bird flying in and coming in for a landing, but I really wanted my birds to actually be standing or sitting or whatever birds do on the branches themselves. So now I'm going to stamp my ground image in the gray granite ink just below the tree, and I actually like it to overlap the very bottom of the tree just a bit, again so the tree doesn't look like it's flying above the ground. And then I'm going to take this second image, which I can play around with at the very bottom to create a little bit more of a different kind of ground, doing first, second, and third inking. And that's pretty much it for that focal piece. Now for this next focal piece I've used quite a number of images, more than in the last one, so it's a little bit more complicated to build, but it's still really easy. So I'm going to start with stamping my little cabin there, because to me that's sort of the anchor point for the scene. So I've stamped that cabin in early espresso ink. And next I'm going to be stamping my evergreen trees. Now in this stamp set there are 5 images that are evergreen trees in different shapes and sizes. I'm using Mossy Meadow ink for these, and I'm going to start with the biggest of the images and do one image fully inked up there and to the right. And now I've got one of my smaller evergreen trees that I'm going to stamp next. You may be able to see there that I have more than one stamp mounted to each block, so I'm just turning it over when I want to use the other side. And now I've inked up that one long sort of series of trees, if you will, stamped it off, and then I'm going to stamp that a few times with stamped off ink. And again, the stamping off allows me to get some dimension and depth to the forest scene that I'm creating, so some of the trees look like they're in the background and some in the foreground. And I just keep kind of coming in with each of the different evergreen trees, the different shapes and sizes, to create my scene. So on the left there, I've used 3 out of my 4 evergreen trees to sort of create the forest scene and frame the focal piece on the left side. Now I'm using my gray granite ink with that small ground image, using full ink in a couple select spots. And now I've turned that image over just to have some variation in the shapes created on the ground. And I'm using first and second inking and third inking in some cases. And last but not least, with this image, I'm going to come in and do some ground at the very bottom of the cardstock to create a place for my deer to stand, and a little bit of ground under the trees on the left as well. And now I'm using my soft suede ink to stamp the little pair of deer right there. Now I could have stopped here and made a card with this, as you see I have done right here. This one uses puff paint as well, and I've got a little snowman there on the left. But my vision for this card was that I was going to provide a second alternative for stamping the focal piece, but I wanted to be able to use the exact same card layering and cardstock, and that original version had some blue in it. So I decided to stamp some of the mountains in the blueberry bushel ink on this focal piece also to see if it would then work with the same card layering. So here I've stamped off my blueberry bushel on my scratch paper, stamped it on to my focal piece, and now I'm stamping it again for my second inked image and then third inking for the mountain in the background. So to finish off these cards, I'm going to dry emboss a piece of Seaside Spray using my subtle embossing folder, and of course I've done one for each of the cards, and I'm orienting it so that the lines are horizontal or with the landscape orientation. And now I'm just going to go ahead and attach that piece to my blueberry bushel card base. And I've got dimensionals on the back side of my early espresso cardstock piece. And now I'm just going to attach my focal piece to my early espresso piece. And then I'll go ahead and attach my assembled focal piece to the card. So as you can see, with this one simple change of adding the blue mountains to my stamped images, I was able to use the same card layering for both of these cards and provide a couple of alternatives for how to stamp and create 2 different cards instead of just one. I hope you've enjoyed my projects today. To learn more about my clubs and free card kit program, click on the link in the video description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today, and happy crafting!